It's time for questions to the Executive Office. Questions 1, 4 and 11 have been withdrawn. I call Connie Egan. Minister.
Speaker. Through Communities in Transition, we are determined to build a safer society free from the negative influences of paramilitarism, criminality and coercive control. The Tackling Paramilitarism, Criminality and Organised Crime programme has been extended into 24-25 following a commitment from the UK Government and the Northern Ireland Executive. The programme will invest £2.3 million in CIT for 2024-25, subject to the agreement of the Executive's budget for this year. CIT has delivered 82 projects totalling £19 million across the 8 CIT areas. 51 projects have been completed, with the remaining 31 contracts continuing into 24-25, with a renewed focus on the main issues impacting communities in terms of paramilitarism, criminality and coercive control. If we are to bring lasting change and release all communities from the grip of paramilitary control, we need to continue to adopt an holistic approach to tackle systemic issues and work in partnership with our local communities.
Connie Egan.
Very much, Deputy First Minister. I've seen the great work of projects funded by CIT in my own constituency. Can I please ask if, going forward for the next tranche of funding, there will be more flexibility shown in the areas that are targeted?
Minister.
It's always very difficult because you draw a boundary around certain areas that either qualify or don't qualify, and it sometimes can be, of course, as simple as a house to a house or a street to a street. So in many of the Executive Office programmes, we do try to show flexibility. For example, in urban villages, we were able to adopt that flexible approach. And I agree with you that there should be flexibility in this programme moving forward. We're currently undertaking that evaluation of Phase 2, and that will inform Phase 3, but that is certainly an issue that has come up, and I've heard the member on that issue.
Brian Kingston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I ask the Deputy First Minister, how successful has the CIT project been to date, and what has been delivered through it?
Minister.
Thank you. There have been a number of projects. 156 social action projects have been delivered already. That accounts for 9,000 participants. And the member will be aware that this is not to replace but to supplement and to complement the PSNI activities in tackling criminality. And therefore these are projects that work very much with the community and building community resilience and building that community capacity and encouraging young people in those communities to pursue positive and progressive pathways, particularly in relation to training, education and sport into employment. It is vitally important that those communities have that bright future, that they feel the dividend from a peaceful and stable Northern Ireland, and that's what these projects have really been focused on.
Alan Chambers.
Can the Minister confirm if she has had any discussions with the Justice Minister to move away from the use of the term paramilitaries and instead focus on calling them for what they are, and that is drug dealers, child abusers and organised crime gangs?
Minister.
Thank you. There's undoubtedly a significant amount of criminality in relation to some of these individuals and some of these organisations. There are, of course, though, uniquely Northern Ireland aspects to those, because some of those organisations have their roots and have their origins in our past and in the Troubles, and of course that brings a particular dimension to that. So that's why this programme does take that into account. But as I indicated, this is certainly not a light touch on criminality. This is here to work alongside the PSNI, supporting the PSNI to really tackle that criminality and have a zero tolerance approach to that criminality, drug dealing and other abuses within communities, those abuses that bring our communities down. I think it's important to note, though, that within those communities there are many, many fantastic examples of community work, organisations, young people, families and community activity. And of course these areas shouldn't just be seen through the prism of the criminality and other aspects that have plagued them for some considerable time.
Before I call Mark Durkin, could I ask the Deputy First Minister to point the microphones towards her, because Hansard are struggling to hear. That will go on as well. Mr Durkin.
Thank you, Speaker. I've also seen firsthand some extremely successful CIT projects in the Craigan area of my constituency, and I commend all involved in those. However, there are some other projects, the effectiveness of which maybe isn't as obvious, and this has led to sometimes frustration in the community. There are questions that perhaps the Deputy First Minister can answer around how projects are selected for funding, and how new projects can come forward under that process.
Deputy First Minister.
As indicated in the initial answer, this phase of CIT, and this year we will have 2.3 million. That is building on the work of the previous 2 years. But we are now moving towards a phase 3 of CIT. There's been a consultation which has been underway for some time, and that consultation is really looking at which projects have been the most effective, why perhaps some of the projects that have been supported have not been as effective as hoped for. This is all set within the matrix of the key principles within CIT, and as indicated, those are about building community resilience. It is about working with communities and young people, the transitioning of young people through sport, through training, through other initiatives into positive futures. So many of these projects are based on best practice, but as we know, that doesn't guarantee that they do work, and that's why this consultation and evaluation is important to inform the way forward into CIT phase 3, which must take into account some of the issues that the member has raised.
Alistair.
Does this not have to start closer to home with the Executive Office? Is there any sign of the Minister's partner in government transitioning to be able to condemn IRA murders? We've just had another example of the failure to condemn after the focus on the horrendous Kings Mills massacre. Surely that's a baby step, but a necessary step for anyone in government.
Minister.
Thank you. I think it is welcome that we've had the opportunity today to mark the appalling atrocity of Kingsmill. We know that this has been a very long and difficult journey for those families. The coroner confirmed that this was a deeply sectarian attack, and certainly, personally speaking, I have absolutely no issue with standing here and saying this very, very clearly that all terrorism is wrong. There was always an alternative, and I would certainly urge all members of the Executive to do the same.
Brenda Dillon.
Thank you, Minister. Can you provide us with an overview of the successes and key deliverables in the CIT programme, please?
Minister.
Thank you. There were a number of key themes in the programme, including community development, health and wellbeing, environment and culture, community safety and policing, personal transition, addressing the needs of young people, and expansion of restorative practices. I am pleased to say that following that in-depth consultation and evaluation of this over the last number of weeks and months, that there's been a very positive feedback in terms of the outcomes working with communities. We will be obviously going into that in more detail in terms of the types of projects that have seemed to have worked very, very well. But importantly, what we need to do is to learn from that and make sure that we are pulling forward that best practice, not just into the third phase of this, but into a number of other programmes that we are working within communities to build that community resilience. Because, of course, what works here in terms of that resilience and the social capital within those communities will work with a range of other projects that I know that the Executive is focusing on.
Kelly Armstrong. Minister.
Thank you. We are currently considering a process of identifying executive nominees to the boards of the North-South implementation bodies. We intend the executive nominees to vacancies on the boards of North-South bodies will be progressed in the forthcoming weeks and months, and that appointments will be made at the sectoral meetings.
Kelly Armstrong, please.
Deputy First Minister, can you confirm how the Executive Office intends to improve the work of the North-South bodies so that it aligns with the future programme for government investment strategy and budgets approved by the Assembly?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The North-South Ministerial Council and the sectoral bodies and associated work are all rooted in the Belfast Good Friday Agreement as amended by St Andrews Agreement. That means that it is focused on the stranded approach, and that is right and proper. That sets the parameters for that work. That work recognises that the internal affairs and matters of Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom are a matter for the Northern Ireland and United Kingdom Government. But of course, that work, which does align with the programme for government within the context of that stranded approach, the appropriate areas of work will of course be aligned insofar as possible.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. Deputy First Minister, you mentioned the stranded approach. You mentioned the fact that the NSMC's work is set out in parameters in the Good Friday Agreement. Now, none of that is true of the East-West Council. There is no obligation when the East-West Council meets for ministers to bring back any report on what was discussed, or for there to be more than one, ministers from multiple parties. I presume, given your party brought down the institutions because in order to, as you said at the time, rebalance East-West versus North-South, you would support the East-West Council coming under the same rules and constraints as the North-South Ministerial Council?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I absolutely support full transparency in relation to the work of the East-West Council. It is, of course, a new body, but I do think it was something that perhaps was missed at the time of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, where we had that Ireland and United Kingdom bodies, we had the North-South bodies, but we didn't have a body dedicated under those arrangements to focus on internal UK relationships and arrangements. So I think that there's huge potential with this body, particularly, and not just with that engagement with the UK government, but with the north of England, with Manchester, with Scotland, with Wales, where we know that there's a huge amount of commonality across many, many of the challenges and also opportunities we face. So I fully support full transparency and all of the procedures around that to ensure that members are fully informed about the exciting work that I believe that this body will take forward.
Emma Sheeran.
We are all best served when all the institutions of the Good Friday Agreement are operating in full, and that means the North-South bodies as well as the East-West bodies. And as such, I welcome last week's meeting of the NSMC. I wonder if you could outline some of the topics that were discussed at the NSMC plenary last Monday.
Sure.
Well, as I indicated, it was an initial meeting, so many of the issues discussed had been issues that there had been sectoral work carrying on throughout that period. All of the sectoral bodies are quorum and were able to continue with some of their work, but of course the issues that were discussed are those issues that rightly fall within the areas of responsibility of the North-South. That included issues such as the Ulster Canal, in relation to the continued funding, for example, of the A5. So there are a number of important issues, collaborative projects that have been in the pipeline for some considerable time. I know it's been an issue of some frustration for many people, including across this chamber, that those projects have not progressed, and it's important that we continue to have that collaboration in relation to those. As I said at the meeting, it is important that we are good neighbours with the Irish Government, and that where it is logical and where it is set within the appropriate parameters of the institutions, we should of course have that positive engagement.
Question 4 has been withdrawn. I call Sinead McLaughlin. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The redevelopment of Meanan Square is approximately 1.2 million transformative capital project in the Bogside Fountain Urban Village area. The aim of the scheme is to improve good relations outcomes and to develop a thriving place where there has been a history of deprivation and community tension. The project, delivered by the Executive Office's Urban Villages Initiative in conjunction with Apex Housing Association and Meanan Square Development Limited, will see the construction of a mixed-use development comprising of housing, a community hub and essential local amenities. The project will be subject to formal planning application in the summer of 2024. Work is anticipated to commence on site by late 2025, subject to planning approval.
Thank you, Minister, for your answer. This project is a really long-running saga and is deeply frustrating at the length of time it has taken to progress. Residents in the Bogside area are actually losing patience. It's a complete and utter eyesore. How confident is the Deputy First Minister that the people of Derry will see this redevelopment taking place at pace, and when will the completion date be?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member will be aware, the first phase of Urban Villages is now coming to an end, including a number of the revenue resource projects. There have been some challenges in relation to some of the capital proposals, and this is one of those. Some of those proposals, as we know, can be unexpected. They can be significant barriers to progressing these in the timescales as originally set out. That was certainly the case here. I do welcome the fact that we were able to purchase this in accordance with LPS valuation, and I think that that purchase of this site will enable work now to progress at pace, but it is an issue that both the First Minister and I are very focused on, and we will be asking for regular updates on this to ensure that this happens as quickly as possible, particularly as we're moving towards Urban Village Phase 2.
Ciara Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister set out the plans and timeline for the community consultation for the Meanan Square project, please? Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. The consultation will be subject, as you indicated, to a community consultation over the course of spring of 2024. There will be a 12-week statutory standstill period on the designs to allow for feedback of the community. So that is quite a lengthy period of time, but we do want to ensure that the local community have maximum buy-in, that they have an opportunity to look at the proposals, that they are content with those proposals. And of course, importantly, if these are proposals that are not going to work for the local community, then that we do take those away, genuinely listen to the issues being raised and amend those proposals before substantive work commences. So, we are aware that a 12-week consultation period will delay the commencement of work on the site, but it's important because urban villages, at its very heart, the project has as a key principle that this is a co-designed, co-produced project and projects with the local community and local stakeholders. So we want to maximise buy-in to that.
Speaker, and can I thank the Deputy First Minister for her response and also for the work that she has done over the years in terms of the development of the Urban Villages initiative. The Fountain area is one such area which has benefited from the Urban Villages. Could the Deputy First Minister outline how the Fountain area has benefited and what plans there are for the future in terms of the Urban Villages programme?
Sure.
Thank you. There's been really pleasing progress in relation to this Derry, Londonderry urban village area. It was actually one of the very first areas that I visited back when I was Junior Minister when we were creating this scheme, and it was very clear when we visited all of those areas impacted that there was a significant degree of dereliction, there was a significant degree of support required. And one of the key things that was said to me, I think particularly in the Cathedral Youth Club which I visited, was that there's lots of ideas about how to improve the area. The local community know what the solutions are in terms of some of the challenges being faced, but it was often very difficult to find the appropriate scheme because the criteria was quite exclusionary. So there's been some really good examples: Fountain Play Park, the work being done to completed on the Cathedral Youth Club, and the very exciting Newgate Arts and Cultural Centre, which I know that everybody in the city will be aware of, a very significant new build with a very exciting programme coming up. So look, there's been lots of very positive work. We're going to learn from this as we move into urban villages too.
Patrick Brown. Minister.
Okay, when notifications are received proposing the addition of a new EU Act to the Windsor Framework is made, there is a 2-week period where the First Minister and myself, acting jointly, may decide to table an applicability motion on the regulation. After this 2-week period, an applicability motion may only be tabled by any other member of the Assembly, and a vote will be held before the end of a 5-week period following the notifications being made. A decision to jointly table an applicability motion for new published EU acts will be considered on a case-by-case basis.
Mr Brown.
Thank you, Deputy First Minister. Given the Executive Office has now tabled an applicability motion regarding a new EU Act on organic pet food, can Deputy First Minister confirm that this office will take a similar approach to any and all future EU Acts falling within the remit of an applicability motion?
Minister.
As a member will be aware, the process is set out that there's consideration of that. The Scrutiny Committee will also be helpful in terms of looking as to whether or not an amendment or a proposed new regulation will create any barriers. The purpose of this new mechanism was previously described as the storm and break, but there's 2 distinct elements, of course, to that, depending on whether it's an amendment or a proposed new regulation. But the purpose of that was to allow this House to have scrutiny, either through the committees, through the ministerial roles, and also in terms of debate in this chamber. Of course, that is a duty that falls on the First Minister and I to consider whether or not to move that forward. And in that consideration, we will look at all of the aspects, particularly in relation to whether a new regulatory barrier would be created north, south, east, west. In this case, we believe that applying this regulation would avoid any new regulatory barriers in terms of within the United Kingdom or north, south, and that's why we have made the decision to jointly table that motion.
Philip McGuigan.
And the Minister touched on her response with regard to applicability motions, which is one aspect of scrutiny. Can I ask the Deputy First Minister what role she sees for the Democratic Scrutiny Committee in that and other aspects of EU legislative changes here in the North?
I think it's a very important role. This is only the second proposal that we've had, which would be subject to the applicability motion mechanism. And I know that the committee, of course, with new members, is only is getting a sense, I think, of how it will want to work and when it will want to inform. We have raised some concerns that this proposal, this regulation, came in over the course of Easter weekend and into recess. I think it's important that we do maximise the time that we have to take a look at whether or not the First Minister and I should lay down applicability motion, and if that is not the case, then in terms of informing other members in relation to maybe them wanting to do so. Look, I think we need to be careful around the timescales of this and to be fully informed, but I think the work will be essential because many of these issues will be very, very technical, and we will need to know very quickly whether or not new regulatory barriers may be created by these proposals.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank you, Deputy First Minister, for her responses so far. I would like to ask, with regard to the Minister signing applicability motions, could she please outline the rationale for doing that?
Sure.
As indicated, this was a new mechanism to ensure that there was appropriate democratic scrutiny, that there was the option and opportunity to take a look at the impact of these. Prior to this, in relation to the protocol arrangements, there was not that opportunity. That created a significant democratic deficit for this House and for Northern Ireland. There is now this opportunity to do that. We are informed through the notification through you, Mr. Speaker, in relation to whether or not these proposals would have the risk of creating a regulatory barrier. In this case, the rest of the United Kingdom had already lowered the requirements around the ingredients to 95% to be labelled organic pet food, and this regulation would propose that the rest of the European Union would do likewise. If we did not set down this applicability motion and indicate we want this to be applied, and this was not applied, this would leave Northern Ireland as the only place within this United Kingdom where it would require 100% of content before it could be labelled. So it is a technical proposal, but it is one to ensure that we do not create regulatory barriers within this United Kingdom or North-South.
Down Dodds.
Question number 7, please.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I would ask Junior Minister Cameron to answer this question.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Executive Office is committed to supporting isolated minority communities throughout the region and along the border. The Department aims to improve social, environmental and economic well-being, creating a place where people thrive through strategic policies, programmes and services. The TBUC strategy reflects the Executive's commitment to improving community relations and continuing the journey towards a more united and shared society. The strategy is delivered through the TBUC-funded programmes. These are managed by the Executive Office and other government departments. These include initiatives such as TBUC Camps, Urban Villages Initiative, Planned Interventions Programme and District Council's Good Relations Programme. The Executive Office support the good relations elements of the new Peace Plus programme, representing €145 million in investment across the programme area. Peace Plus will soon see the rollout of the co-designed local authority Peace Plus action plans and regional buildings positive relations programme, which will promote positive relations characterised by respect, celebrate cultural diversity and encourage people to live, learn and socialise together. The Peace Plus programme places particular emphasis on providing support to those most marginalised within our communities. Through the draft refugee integration strategy, the Executive Office collaborates with departments, councils, key stakeholders and those with lived experience. We recognise that integration is a two-way process and acknowledge the ways communities benefit from the experience, skills and diversity of those arriving. The Executive Office also provides support to victims and survivors through the Victims and Survivors Service. These programmes provide a variety of support, including health and wellbeing support, social support, advocacy and welfare support.
Ms Dodds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the Minister for her response. Her response was, in fact, fairly general, and I specifically wanted to know about communities that were marginalised, and indeed communities like the King's Mill families that have felt the brunt of the IRA genocide that was experienced along the border. But would the Minister also agree with me that there are other communities who don't live along the border but who feel just as marginalised? And I think of communities in South Lurgan.
Question, please, Ms Dodds.
Yeah, in Mornview and particularly Brownlow House, How can the Executive Office support these communities?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank the member for her question. And in terms of an update around that, the Upper Bann area, North Lurgan and Drumgask are CIT core areas, and during 2023-24 CIT provided support to these communities through 2 programmes, Health and Wellbeing and Community Safety and Policing. Total funding of $114,500 was provided to communities in transition Lurgan during this delivery year. And this year saw the delivery of a wide range of projects, including North Lurgan and at-risk substance misuse to young men's group who are known to cause antisocial behaviour, and Mind Your Mate programme, which saw multiple agencies come together with groups of young people to educate them on how to communicate with emergency services. So there are other examples I could give the member of interventions that have happened. And following consultations in 2022, Mournview in the South Lurgan area was brought into CIT's remit as an area of influence, and work began on delivering interventions to local residents deemed to be at risk of paramilitary influence, including a physical activity programme and training in first aid and child protection. In 2023-24, a further £10,000 was invested in Mournview on a restorative approach programme, which included community safety workshops, youth engagement and promotion of community pride and inclusion. A 9-month extension period for April to December 2024 has been agreed with CIT delivery partners, seeing £109,000 invested in further delivery. So I think it's important to say that we do want to ensure that we're working across all areas, and it would be good if the member has any very more specific queries, if she wouldn't mind writing into the Executive Office so that the matter can be explored further.
Mr McGlynn.
Okay, Concordia, thank you, and I thank the Minister for a response, particularly around the social, environmental and economic well-being. Would the Minister agree that there, in many areas, there's increased rural isolation, and isolation brought about by a denuding of services in some areas, say for example health, domiciliary care and the likes, and would the Minister agree that that could be even further exacerbated? We already have a problem with absence of public transport in some areas. Would the Minister agree that that could be further exacerbated by, number one, the absence of infrastructure for EV, but also the cost of EV? Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for the question, and if you don't mind I will come back to the member in writing on that. Thank you.
Yeah, please.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The role of our offices in Washington DC, Brussels and Beijing is to represent and promote the Executive's interests and priorities overseas. As a small, outward-looking economy, this is key to our ambitions to build a more prosperous region where our businesses and our citizens can realise their potential. The Bureau works closely with key partners including InvestNI, Tourism Ireland, local government and business communities in promoting Northern Ireland as a great place to work, live, invest and visit. We have come to enjoy unprecedented access to key decision makers at the most senior levels, right at the heart of the world's largest economies. This was very much demonstrated by the engagements the First Minister and I had over in St Patrick's Week in DC, as well as those of Junior Minister Riley and Junior Minister Cameron in Brussels. While that is welcome, it is a result of hard work over many years in building those relations and our reputation, and we cannot take it for granted. We need to continue to engage, to build on the access and goodwill we enjoy if we are to realise our ambitions. As we look forward, we will need to have a clear focus on both our priorities for overseas offices, but also on new opportunities and regions.
I thank the Minister for her answer. Can I ask her if she can outline a timeline for a refreshed international strategy moving forward? Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As the member will be aware, the International Relations Strategy was released by the then OFM-DFM in 2014. It was a refresh for a number of years. Proposals were made in 2016-2017. But there's also been a significant change in the world since 2014 on that original strategy, not least in terms of the geopolitical dynamics, in terms of the economies that are emerging and perhaps would be a good fit for us in relation to enhancing that engagement and looking for opportunities collaboratively. So we're very conscious that we do need to have that significant review and refresh of our international relations strategy. We are working with officials at the moment in terms of that work, and we would hope to set out the timeline for that in the next number of weeks.
Move to topical questions. Call Matthew O'Toole.
The Education Minister has told me that he was told by the Finance Minister funding was to be cut from integrated schools on the 15th of February. Those schools were not told, the 10 integrated schools were not told until the 22nd of February. But yourself, the First Minister and the Education Minister visited the shared education campus in Limavady on the 21st, before the integrated schools were told their funding was cut. Did you know about the funding cut when you visited Limavady? Why wasn't it public by that stage? And do you agree with the executive decision to cut funding?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member will be aware that the financial situation of the budget in Northern Ireland had been an issue of significant concern for some significant time, including when this place was not sitting. There was a high level of discussion and negotiation and communication with the UK Government to try to secure a better financial arrangement for Northern Ireland. Indeed, personally speaking, I can say very clearly it was my party that had pushed very, very hard for those discussions to commence immediately and to commence prior to the restoration of these institutions, acknowledging that the budget as it was allocated at that point would have been woefully insufficient and in fact would not have even have allowed us to do public pay, settlements, etc. So therefore I welcomed the fact that an additional 3.4 billion was secured from the UK Government. What was disappointing about that though, and we've said this very clearly, is that there were aspects of that were repackaged. And what he is referring to is a repackage of funding that originally had been allocated towards a particular purpose. So, of course, that has been very difficult to deal with. The budget is very, very tight. We're in a period of fiscal constraint and hard decisions will have to be made. I cannot speak for the Education Minister, but I can only assume that it was communicated to him that he will have rightly and prudently taken time to take a look into this issue, to have those discussions with his officials and to take advice on that matter. Now, it is a matter for him to explain the timelines involved in that, but I can only imagine that that may well have been what has happened.
Speaker, Minister, to be clear, this money wasn't reprofiled by the UK Government. They took a ring fence off, which the Executive made a decision to implement a cut into integrated schools. But on a related issue, last week my colleague Colin McGrath asked the First Minister when we would see a programme for government. She said hopefully by the summer, but let's not be in a hurry. Are you in a hurry to deliver a programme for government? When will it be delivered? And can you confirm that the now more than a dozen commitments made by executive parties in private members' motions will be formally implemented via a programme for government?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. We are very keen to get a programme for government as soon as possible, but that programme for government must be the right programme for government. It must include the key priorities of the executive. It must be realistic, and of course we are working with the Finance Minister in relation to the budget implications around that. I do believe that a programme for government works best where it is strategic and it has a small number of key actions for the executive. That is not to take away from the significant amount of work that will occur within each and every department, and ministers should rightly bring forward all of those elements of that work to the executive in the normal way. But what we're focusing on is a high-level strategic programme for government. It is possible to get that done by the summer, but indeed what the First Minister was indicating, I believe, is that listening to the consultation feedback, listening to the committees, we will be ensuring first and foremost that this is right, rather than just going towards a deadline. But of course the aim is to get this completed and in place by the summer.
Question 2 is withdrawn. I call Owen Tennyson.
Can I ask the Deputy First Minister to set out the next steps in the truth recovery process in respect of mother and baby homes and when appropriate redress and recognition will be available?
Minister.
There were a number of key recommendations in relation to the report on mother and baby homes. Those have all been actioned and work is underway. I think the key next step, of course, will be around the legislation. There is a draft of that legislation there. There's a number of policy issues which are outstanding. We have been urging work to be completed on that for a consultation to commence as soon as possible. We're very conscious that many of those people most affected, particularly the mothers, are of a certain age profile, and we want them to be able to get that redress and support as quickly as possible rather than to wait in the longer term. The member will also be aware there's a number of other recommendations. I can assure you that work is progressing against all of those recommendations, but there is a key focus at this time on getting that legislation out to consultation as quickly as possible.
Mr Tennyson.
Mr Speaker, and I thank the Deputy First Minister for her answer. One of the key issues highlighted in the report prepared for the Interdepartmental Working Group was in respect of the deterioration of records of religious and voluntary organisations. Can I ask the Minister what steps her department has taken to ensure those records are protected, and will we see that reflected in the draft legislation?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The member will be aware that we've also appointed the 10-person panel. We have our stakeholder engagement groups. We have the forum in relation to both mothers and those adoptees that were impacted by this. So this issue has come up from a range of those areas as well. We want those records to be preserved. They need to be preserved because they are so important in terms of informing and giving that information. We have been working with PRONI and other organisations in terms of securing those records. It's not without its difficulty, but we have a determination to work through that and to do what we can, and that work is continuing. I'm happy to follow that up with a more specific briefing on those issues if the member so wishes.
Question 4 is withdrawn. I call Connie Egan.
First Minister, last week at the Executive Office Committee we heard from victims and survivors of historical institutional abuse. Can I please ask what your department is doing to ensure that the institutions responsible for that abuse will contribute to the redress scheme?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This is an incredibly important issue, not just because there ought to be a financial contribution by the institutions because there was fault by those institutions, but I think it's also incredibly important in terms of the acknowledgement of their role, and I know that that has been raised by the victims and survivors of historical institutional abuse, that is an important element. We have appointed a person in terms of that liaison. That person has been in place for the last number of years, and we've extended that by a further 2 years to enable him to continue that engagement with the institutions. We have made progress, and we hope to be in a position to announce very shortly some of the early financial contributions by some of the institutions, but that work will continue. We are determined that institutions should play their part rightly and make that financial contribution, and that is what this work is committed to, and we will update the House in due course as to progress about that.
Egan.
Thank you, Deputy First Minister. Would you agree with me that the time it's taken for this to progress, it's now been 14 years, has compounded the trauma for those who were subject to the abuse? Because, as you said, it's not just about the monetary contribution, it's about the significance and the acknowledgement that there was wrongdoing.
Minister.
Absolutely, Mr Speaker. This has been a very challenging journey for many of those campaigners who sought for this inquiry to happen, for the truth to be told and for redress. I pay tribute absolutely to those campaigners. It has been a very difficult journey, that has happened upon very difficult experiences that they experienced, and they were personally very much involved and touched and impacted by what has happened. So I pay tribute to them. It has been a long journey. I am glad that the work of the Redress Board is now drawing to a close in terms of the processing of those applications, with only a small number of those applications left to be processed. We do anticipate that some may come forward now within the last year of the operation of that board. So the work is not yet complete, but we are certainly getting to the end of that work, and I am glad that this inquiry, the Redress Board, has been able to give at least some acknowledgement and recognition of the terrible things that many of those people have experienced.
Harry Harvey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Deputy First Minister, could you provide an update on the Executive's efforts in seeking to ensure that the legislation to reverse the convictions of sub-postmasters applies to Northern Ireland? Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. Absolutely, there is only, as we understand it, a small number of people in Northern Ireland impacted by this, but those who were undoubtedly would have had their lives profoundly changed by what happened and the great injustice of the issue. And therefore we have been working, along with the Justice Minister and along with colleagues, and I know many others in this House have been doing the same, to push for the Northern Ireland to be included within that legislation. I think it's vitally important. The time it would take for us to put through bespoke legislation would be disproportionate, but also mean that justice would be delayed for, in all likelihood, a number of years. So we have been working hard. We met with the relevant minister when we were over with the East West Council. We took that opportunity to meet face to face to really push that issue and to urge, and we see no legal impediment to Northern Ireland's inclusion within that UK-wide bill. It would be the timely thing to do, and I think it's important to give justice to those who have suffered this injustice.
Mr. Harvey.
Thank you. So is the executive in communication with the families affected by the sub-postmasters convicts?
Minister.
Yes, the Justice Minister has taken the lead on this issue on behalf of the Executive in terms of liaising with the families. We've also made the offer that we are happy, more than happy, to meet directly with the families, but I think importantly for them is getting that inclusion within this legislation to enable timely recognition that the injustice is reversed and that they have these issues fundamentally addressed.
Thank you.
Cheryl Brownlee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Deputy First Minister for her answer so far. It was reported in the media this week that it may take up to 11 years for the York Street interchange scheme to commence. This was a huge opportunity for Northern Ireland, secured by the DUP's confidence and supply deal. Does the Minister agree with me that this length of delay is wholly unacceptable?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the member for her question. Look, absolutely. There has been a challenge. When you look at our investment strategy and the proposals agreed by the various executives of the past in terms of particularly big capital projects, some have been delivered, the Titanic Centre and others, some very, very good successes, but there have been a number of key examples where we haven't been able to get delivery, and that is for a range of reasons. Some of those are planning reasons, there's objections, there's other significant issues, despite the fact that budgets perhaps were secured for those at the time. 11 years in relation to this project, it was frustrating. It did feature in terms of the confidence and supply arrangement because of the frustrations of how long that was taken and funding secured. So this is something that we do need to look at, Mr. Speaker. Our hope would be that the new delivery unit that would be set up under the Executive Office will be able to examine this issue, in particular capital delivery, and try to ensure that we do get these delivered in a timely way.
Ms. Brownlee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Deputy First Minister for her answer. Considering this is such an important project for our economy, can the Deputy First Minister confirm that she will continue to raise this as a priority within the Executive?
Look, absolutely. These big projects are key levers in terms of the growth of our economy, in terms of the movement of our city, in terms of what we need to do in relation to the prosperity agenda. We need to grow our economy here in Northern Ireland. That can only happen with that type of investment and the essential infrastructure. This will continue to be a key priority, but as indicated, this and some other projects must serve as an example to be looked at in relation to our delivery unit proposal to see what can be done to ensure that this doesn't happen again and that these big capital projects and infrastructure projects can move forward in a timely way and insofar as possible and within the budget set.
Declan Kearney.
Minister, can you provide an update in relation to the Executive's focus on tackling the environmental catastrophe in Lough Neagh?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for his question. The First Minister and I had the opportunity to go down to visit Lough Neagh and to hear from a wide range of stakeholders, those who use the loch, those who rely on the loch for their business, those who enjoy the loch in terms of leisure, and those who live around the loch. This is a significant issue that we need to address. We know that there will not be a quick fix to this, but we need to start now if we are ever going to get to the point of getting a resolution. It is a complex issue. It was important for us to hear from people around what those issues are, and we give that strong indication that we want to work, particularly with the DAERA Minister, but also with stakeholders and those who use and enjoy the loch to find the solutions that are needed, secure the budget for the implementation, and ensure delivery to ensure that we are getting towards that point of addressing these terrible issues that the loch has faced.
Last year, commercial fishermen and their families were exposed to extreme financial hardship as a direct result of the virtual collapse of the eel fishing season. The eel fishing season resumes on the 1st of May. What more can be done to provide protections to ensure that they are not exposed to the same financial hardship this year?
Mr.
Well, I think one of the key messages that we heard when we attended and we spoke to those who work and live by and with the loch was that, look, the loch is still there, it's open for business, it still works. There are many, many fantastic aspects to Loch Ness, and while we have these challenges, and these challenges will need to be addressed, we want to send that very positive message that actually there are significant issues in relation to the high quality work that happens there, the high quality produce that comes out of the loch. There's no safety concerns about that whatsoever. So I think as we move towards the summer, we need to be better in sending that clear message to people. That some of perhaps of what has been discussed last summer had that negative impact when it didn't need to have that negative impact. But of course, overall, this will be about the executive acting to address the big issues and make sure that these problems do not arise that arisen last summer.
We now move to questions to Minister for Health, and we call on Keith Buchanan. Please.
His question. The Northern Health and Social Care Trust have actually had 4 new providers contract with them in the past